Welcome to smartpeoplepodcast.com.
All right, here we go. So the agenda is really pretty simple. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on. And I've given this 1 hour talk on resilience for several years. We're obviously in the midst of a pandemic. So we're going to talk about this with that being the relevant issue of the day in the context. But it still is interesting to understand what's happened in the last 50 or 60 years, because there are some forces that have been acting on our society. I believe we are less resilient because we do have higher levels of depression and lower levels of happiness. We'll get into that. The majority of our time we'll be talking about what we can do about it. And hopefully you walk away with some science-backed tips for what you can do differently. And what I will tell you is everything we talk about is not going to work for you. 1, 2, maybe 4 or 5 things will, but just take some quick notes, watch the video again on which things you think would resonate with you. And I'll highlight the ones I think that have the most power and that work with the greatest number of people as we go through it. So, Chris, you must have a question already.
I don't. I'm good.
Okay.
I'm ready. Jump in.
We're cranking. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what is going on. You know, in the last 50 years, I love using this picture because it's around the time, if you're a Mad Men fan, and I unfortunately binge watched that a couple of years and had to take a shower after every episode because the smoking, the drinking, the adultery, it was just horrible. But we were more resilient back in the 50s and earlier. In fact, we have more depression today than we had during the Great Depression in the 30s. And you could easily say, well, Doug, you know what? That's a measurement error. We're looking for it more now. I totally agree. However, there are some estimates that we have 10 times the depression today that we had 50, 60, 70 years ago. And I would say it's almost an epidemic. I mean, I live in Loudoun County, Virginia, and my niece went to the high school here. And she had, for I think 5 or 6 straight years, somebody in her class, she's in college now, she's graduating, somebody from her graduating class has committed suicide. Something's wrong. Something's not working when we are what I would refer to as the richest society in the history of human beings. Compared to 60 years ago, we send 3 times as many kids to college. The average size of the American house is double what it was back then. Real income, or I should say adjusted income, is higher than it was 40 years ago, 50 years ago. But we're just not as happy. We're not doing well. And I think there are a number of forces acting on us. So I want to talk about those real quickly. The first one, and I don't know if you guys had Barry Schwartz on, The Paradox.
We did.
We did.
Yep.
Read this book. Listen to that episode again. You know, when my kids say I want chocolate chip cookies, I go to Wegmans and there's 40 brands, 30 different styles. There's gluten-free, there's sugar-free, you name it. And there's some with nuts, without nuts. And we just, and how many of us are looking at, Netflix every night, and it takes us 30 minutes to decide what we want to watch. Because not only do we have Netflix, we got Amazon Prime, we got HBO Now, YouTube TV, and there's just hundreds, if not thousands, of choices for us. When we have too much choice, that can be debilitating. So, simple tip, limit your choices. Just say, hey, let's watch a comedy tonight. Or I'm going to get gluten-free cookies, or I'm going to get a package that only has 12 cookies in it. I don't know. One of the other things that's not a really good sign, and this is not funny, but interesting in this age and by the way, in the last 2 hours, we're all in Virginia, the 3 of us, and our governor just put us on lockdown till June 10th, right? Mm-hmm. And here you got a room full of guys at a VFW. Well, I grew up in New Jersey, and my grandfather was a member of the VFW in Wallington, New Jersey. And we would go there for beefsteak dinners, and man, the camaraderie, the connection, everyone knew everybody's story, was fantastic. We do less of this. We don't participate in the Moose Lodge. We don't go to churches often. We're not at the VFW and other in-person activities because it's so easy to connect electronically. We need to do more of the in-person stuff. About 50 years ago, a number of psychologists started asking incoming freshmen, why are you getting a college degree? Chris, what do you think their answer was way back in 1970?
To get a job.
No, man, this was the time of bell bottoms and smoking pot and free love, man.
I wasn't there.
That's true. That's true. What the average kid would say was, I want to find my place in the world and I want to make the world a little better place as a result of my education. Today, the answer is I want to make a buck.
Mm.
And I think that's a really interesting shift. It doesn't mean we're more selfish. I'm not going to criticize today's kids graduating from college, but it creates a certain amount of pressure when you're getting your degree to get out, to be able to afford a mortgage, a nice car, pay your debt off really fast. It just changes the level of meaning and purpose, I think, also in your work. And that can sap our resilience as well. Now, the University of Maryland's done some interesting time studies around what we do with our time. And the average American probably would say they're overwhelmed. They have too much going on. And particularly, I know Chris and John, working parents, kids, plus throw in Cujo who's barking in the background, and you feel like you can't. I'm gonna see how many Cujo references I make. And then the other thing is, I noticed I touched my face like twice. So Chris,
I'm going to call you out on that. Well, as long as I'm not in your house and you're not coughing on me. But hey, Doug,
yes.
while we've got a break here, we had a question, a few thoughts that I thought they're all interesting, but this one specifically. One is, what do you think the kind of alignment is between too much choice and depression or anxiety?
Yeah. So the anxiety comes in with, am I making the best choice? Barry Schwartz does a really interesting, I'll give you an example. Let's say I want to go buy a new Toyota Camry, right? We all know that there's a million Toyota dealerships in the Northern Virginia, DC, Maryland area. So if I go onto cars.com or whatever, and I draw, let's just say 100-mile radius, and I say, I'm going to call all these dealerships, get the best price possible, and I'm going to put a spreadsheet together. Those people, as if you remember from Chris's podcast talking to Barry, those people are called maximizers, right? They try to make, and they actually do make technically the best decision possible. Me, I'm a satisficer. I'm going to the 3 closest Toyota dealerships, whichever one gives me the best price, I'm getting it. Now, if you look at the data, let's just say Chris is a maximizer and Doug's a satisficer. Chris gets a better price on average. In fact, way above average. However, and Doug goes, great, got my car, I'm going to go drive it, I'm happy. Chris, a couple of days later, goes, I wish I went and made the radius 110 miles. I probably could have gotten a better price, right?
Well, you know me too well, because in fact, Barry did reveal that I am a maximizer, and it's been something I've been working on. One example he gave, and this is for everyone, he said, if you go to a restaurant and you really love a certain dish, you will be happier purchasing that dish than sampling other dishes. And he goes into a lot of detail on it. And just as look, these are anecdotal, but in my life, that's been true. And it's one area where I've kind of just given away that maximizer mentality. So just throwing that in there.
Yeah, and I do. So how does it relate to anxiety? It's about, you get more anxious with your decisions, and we have so many more choices that anxiety goes up into unhealthy levels. Okay.
Gotcha. Okay.
And by the way, so coming back to this bottom right picture of being overwhelmed, the time studies show we actually have more free time than we used to. I think you've got an account on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, you name it. And you've got an email account, of course. You're getting text messages. We are bombarded with so much data that we feel overwhelmed because I know I have to catch up on my email, my Instagram, LinkedIn messages. But we actually are technically spending more time with our kids than we were 30, 40 years ago, even though we think that that's not true. Okay?
Sorry to jump in, Doug. I have to.
We're going to be here till 7.
No, I promise I won't do this. But listen to this
that's
statistic.
Good.
Listen to this statistic. Stay-at-home mothers in the 50s spent less time with their children than working mothers today.
No doubt. Yep. And
Now
and so
that is proving exactly what you're talking about. We beat ourselves up trying to be everything to everyone right now.
yep, totally agree. Now, the one that gets me the most is the one that's missing. And by the way, I don't mean to point at any generation here. I have a picture of young people. Um, we're spending too much time on our phones. Somebody I would love for you guys to, or I should say in front of screens, connecting that way. Sherry Turkle wrote a book called Reclaiming Conversation. Get her on your podcast, please. Write that down, John. Make that happen, please. Sherry Turkle, Reclaiming Conversation. Blew me away in terms of and I'll just give you this one statistic. In the last 12 or 13 years, the average person graduating from college has something like 40% less empathy than the period before the smartphone was introduced. So Chris and I are connecting over text messages, and we think by putting an emoji in here every once in a while that we're communicating our emotions to each other. It's not happening. Unless we are either on Zoom or in person, I am not getting the full message that Chris is giving to me. And a comedian who I shall not name because he's one of these people who kind of screwed up in the Me Too era, I won't give him credit, but he says something really interesting a number of years ago where he said, when I was a kid, if I was on the playground and I said, Chris, you're ugly. Well, I would watch Chris's shoulders go down, tears go in his eyes, and then I would go, ooh, why did I do that? That doesn't feel really good. Now today I go text message, hey Chris, you're ugly. And I go, ooh, that was fun. Because I don't get any reaction. I don't see Chris feeling pain, right? So my point is all of these things are adding to this weight on all of us that are making it harder for us to connect to each other, make good choices in good time. And, I thought it would be fun for us to do a quick poll to see what do we think is the cause that's sapping our resilience the most. So I'm just going to throw this poll up here. Is that okay? Chris and John, I know you guys are feeling a little out of control right now. All right.
No, this is great.
All right, let's see what people think. So is it too much choice? Is it less participation in community groups, juggling, education focused on income, or greater communication? And how many? So we've got about 40, almost 40 people on, right? Are we having any technical issues with the poll, guys? Anybody having
No, but can we repeat the question?
Which of the following do you think has the biggest negative impact on our resilience as individuals? Thank you, John. I also like this because we get to hear John's voice. No offense, Chris.
Hey, I miss it too. Tell him to stop working so hard.
All right, we still have a couple of results coming in. I'm going to keep the poll open for another couple seconds. It's a horse race. What do you think? We're going to get we got all the votes we're going to get?
Yeah, you got it.
All right, we're going to end the poll, share the results. So Chris, what's jumping out at you?
Nobody knows the answer.
Yeah, I don't, you know what? I will tell you, my coach, because I have a coach as well, he turned me on to something a couple months ago that as human beings, we're constantly looking for simple cause and effect, right? It's a complex problem. And I'm actually almost pleased that the results are spread out because I agree. I would say that how we view education probably has an impact and we have nobody voting for that. But I do think it's all this stuff mixed in and there's probably more, but these are some of the big things. What do you think?
Yep, I'd agree.
Yeah. John, your thoughts?
John.
Oh, I'm here. Don't worry. No, I mean, I agree too. And sorry, I'm trying to keep up with the chat folks as well.
No, fair enough. We won't call on you too much then. All right.
One thing I want to highlight.
free.
Notice the one that nobody voted, using education to focus on making higher income. It's kind of ironic being an educational podcast. I mean, there is a value to this. I just want everybody to know.
Yeah, right. No doubt. I mean, let's be honest. The research also is clear that at least in the United States, getting a college education is worth, I forget what the number is, somewhere between 300 and $500,000 over the course of a lifetime, if not more. So it's not wrong. It's just, what's your purpose? What gets you up and out of bed in the morning, right? And I think if, hey, you're trying to save the world through education, or your goal is to save as many kids as possible, it's a healthier way probably to wake yourself up and go to work every day. That's all. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing these. Okay, and we'll get back to getting into it. So I have a model that I like to use, and hopefully you can remember the acronym to remember a little bit of this: focus. And we're gonna start off, we're gonna talk about some things you can do to be more flexible. We're gonna talk about some things you can do to be more optimistic without going overboard. We're gonna talk about curiosity, mostly in the mindfulness area. And we're going to talk about uplifting. It fit into my acronym, what can I say? But it's really positivity or positive emotions. And then we'll talk about support in terms of relationships and connection. Okay. So let's get into flexibility. Come on. This is what we feel like often, right? We feel like we're being chased by the dinosaur, particularly now with COVID-19. But the problem is we don't even see the dinosaur, right? And I promise this is going to stop any second, because it's
Kind of like it.
And as you've had probably a number of your guests talk about, we have evolved something called the amygdala hijack, right? This little walnut or almond-sized parts of your brain in the back of your head that are kind of a radar for danger, right? And what it does is it hijacks that front part of your brain that's very human, often referred to as the executive brain or the prefrontal cortex, which allows us to contemplate the past, think about the future, experience positive emotions, look at complex things. Well, that gets hijacked, right? And we go into fight, flight, or even freeze when we see the dinosaur, or we go overboard with these emotions. And it reduces our ability to actually generate ideas and think critically about situations. So what can we do about it? Well, I actually think there's a super simple process. The first, and by the way, I should say, what I like us to do is think, how do I get away from running away from the dinosaur and think a little bit more like I'm relaxed, sitting at the pool, sitting at the beach. Of course, in Virginia, that'll be after June 10th, I think now, right? But and hopefully Florida shuts down their beaches, yesterday. But with that said, the first thing that I would urge you to do is just take a deep breath. You've heard this probably from parents, grandparents, teachers. Take a breath, take a breath. There's actually some truth to it. In fact, I don't want to say that this is a validated study, but there are 2 small studies that do point to the fact that if we can just pause and focus on our breathing for 10, maybe 12 seconds, we have a better chance of overcoming the amygdala hijack and re-engaging the front part of our brain. And the reason that that's helpful is because we want to consider the fact that we have lots of choices to act. This is going to sound like a kind of an odd example, but let's just say Chris is my boss, or let's say I'm Chris's boss, and I'm really rude to Chris in a meeting, and I'm insulting to him, I'm interrupting him, and everybody leaves, and Chris is like, "Hey man, can I talk to you for a second?" And I belittle him a little bit again. What are Chris's choices? What can Chris do to me? In fact, why don't we use the chat for this? And by the way, you can be socially unacceptable. Like,
wait, can you state that again, the scenario again? You're my boss.
I've been a jerk to you.
Okay.
What are Chris's choices in how he acts towards me? So go ahead, throw it in the chat box.
Yeah, everybody type in there. I'll read some off.
Yeah.
I would say, this type of thing is breeding. Obviously, we're seeing more workplace violence issues coming up. And I think a lot of that is professional bullying. I mean, that's, I think, the far end of that spectrum.
Right. I'm going to open up the chat room myself and just take a peek at what people are saying. Kristen asked for a one-on-one. He can
Yeah,
yell back.
Lisa said ask for a one-on-one, and I think that's that would be the most mature thing to do.
Right. So I want people to get a little immature because we want to generate as many ideas as possible.
Ooh, somebody said that this essentially basically happened to him. Donna said, and decided it's her problem, not mine.
Ah, I love it.
Wait until you're calm, and then basically explain that you treated me unfairly.
Right.
Uh, Talk about emotions. Dave says, say how it made you feel,
Mm-hmm.
rather than make
Yeah.
it a confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
Go to HR, blow it off, and watch for future actions. Get a
Mm-hmm.
new job. I mean, hey, there's your choice, right?
Yep.
Darren, breathe, then decide if you want to live like this.
Return the favor. Way to go,
Ah,
Thomas.
good.
Virtual high five. So Thomas is in my screen. I can see him. All right, man. Good.
You can do a reaction here. Do a little clap.
There we go. Yeah. So let me just jump in here. The idea is not to come up with socially responsible. I mean, that should be within the realm of the answers that you have. But let's also understand, Chris could grab me by the neck. He could slap me across the face. He could punch me, right? He could scream obscenities at me.
True.
What I'm trying to do is help you engage the prefrontal cortex and not necessarily say, I'm going to do one of these less effective things that are going to get me in trouble, but it gives us the ability to then say, hey, I can now choose the best possible route. When we're in fight or flight and we don't pause and we don't consider our alternatives, we sometimes think, he made me do it. And that's when I'm going to come back with the really, what's the word, immature response, or the one that gets me fired or puts me in a bad spot with my boss and doesn't help him teach. So it's a simple tool to engage flexibility that I like. I use it all the time. And when I hear people say, he made me do this, that's when we start to talk, pause, consider, choose.
Hey, Doug, real quick,
Yes.
this reminds me of some of the things we teach at Covey, and I actually have it on a book behind me here. I'm sure many people out there have heard of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And I'm not sure if you ever use this quote, but I'm sure you know the one I'm referring to. He says, basically in that book, he says, in life, there is stimulus and response. And in between, there is a space. And in that space lies our freedom to choose.
Absolutely.
And this is exactly what you're talking about. There's a stimulus, there's the way we respond, but humans, as far as we know, are the only ones who have that higher level capacity to actually think through the result. And so that quote, and if anybody out there, I'll put the book in the chat, but it's one of the best books about meaning in the history of writing. So
yeah.
anyways.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I forgot to get John's comment on how Chris put all those books. Chris didn't even own a bookshelf yesterday, everybody.
I'll give you.
He threw these up there to look smart.
You know how many books we get sent? Come on, man. I got boxes over here.
Yeah.
It's not even real. It's a green screen.
That's right. That's right.
Enough. Get it going.
So we're scratching the surface on how we can be more flexible. But one of the things that I stumbled across over the years, and I also do, I facilitate crucial conversations classes as well. I'm a certified instructor for that. And it got me thinking about how we talk to other people, how we talk to ourselves even. And there's three things that I think can really get in the way of us considering the fact that there are so many more ways for us to act and think. And the first one is, boy, when I hear always and never, my radar goes up, right? And the reason always and never, I think, is a dangerous phrase, and please also recognize, I don't say never say it. Of course, that would kind of be weird and contradictory. But we have to be aware of them. Now, look, will I always love my kids? Absolutely, right? However, are we always going to be in a recession? Are we always going to be fighting a pandemic? No. And we would be better off paying attention to the words that we use. And when we use an absolute, like always or never, we're actually limiting our ability to think about solutions. Because if something's always going to be around or it's never going to get better, we reduce our effort to overcome that particular obstacle. Okay. I also believe that the way we talk to ourselves around the things that we think we have to do, when we say things like, I should, I have to, I need to. I think, Chris, I've probably mentioned this to you over coffee a couple times. It puts undue pressure on us. It would be much better to say, I'd really like to start becoming more resilient, or I'd really like to start going to the gym. I'd really like to, or I want to eat more, eat healthier and get to bed earlier. As soon as we say the should, I have to, we're setting ourselves up for a disappointment, because guess what? You're going to skip the gym in a week. It's going to happen. You're going to eat a Snickers or a candy bar when you really didn't want to. And when we use these statements, even if they're in our subconscious, we've got to start just becoming aware and bubbling them up and being a little bit more aware of how we do this. And by the way, I'll throw a quick, another tidbit out there is the more that we journal about our emotions, the more that these phrases and these statements come up, and they come into our consciousness, and we're going to be a lot more effective too. So there's like a plug for journaling. James Pennebaker wrote a great book called Opening Up. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. And then the last one, as soon as somebody says, well, we can do this, we can do either this or that, we've limited ourselves. And there are very few times in life when we have only two options. I know that there are times when there are two options, but this is also a radar for me, because I sometimes stop and go, okay, what if these two options didn't exist? What would I do then? Or I'll even throw in something like, okay, I'm throwing up choice A and choice B. What circumstances would need to exist for me to have A and B, right? And that just frees me up from this either or thinking. And in fact, we'll talk a little bit later about another podcast if you have room on your iPad to download. Chris, any questions or comments about this one?
No, but I love how Nathan said, Doug, you need to give marriage counseling.
well, you're talking to a guy who's divorced, so I'm not sure I'm the right person.
Yes, but you've evolved, right? You've evolved.
I have evolved. And I jokingly tell people at the beginning of my 2-day class on crucial conversations, if I had been certified in this while I was married, I would have easily been married for another 6 months.
That's pretty good.
And here's where it gets even funnier. My ex-wife, the mother of my kids, went through the class 2 months ago, told me about it, was raving about how great it was, not knowing that I'm now certified in it. And I told her that I tell people we would have been married for 6 more months, and she didn't hang up on me, but she didn't necessarily care for it.
I was going to say, she probably didn't laugh out loud. I do also want to highlight, Lori said in the chat, the negativity behind using dangerous phrases also affects us at the cellular and molecular level. And just backing that up, I am aware of research that we actually talk about in some of my seminars, that it does modify the chemicals released in your brain, the type of language you use. That's actually a chemical reaction. So thank you, Lori.
Yeah, thank you. And I will tell you, my ex and I are on good terms now, so I don't want to make this look like it's a bad thing. So let's talk a little bit about optimism. The research also on optimism. In fact, Lori almost gave us our segue. This is amazing. The stars are aligning. Thank you, Lori. We know from the research that optimistic thinkers, and by the way, notice that I use that descriptor. It's not optimists. You can evolve into one or the other if you have depending on your mindset. And if you believe, we know from the research that we can change our behavior and our thought patterns. The thing is that I don't disagree with the statement that we change at the molecular level, and I don't disagree that it can have an impact on our health. What has the biggest impact on our health, and let's just do this. Let me annotate for 2 seconds just to make sure I can show people where I'm looking on here. So this one right here, physically healthier, right? We know that in multiple studies around people who have heart issues, right, that the difference between the people who recovered and didn't have subsequent heart attacks was the fact that their behavior changed. And what they found is that if you were more optimistic in your thinking, you were more likely to get your 10,000 steps, go to the gym, stop eating French fries, John,
Hmm.
things like that, than the pessimists the pessimistic thinkers, excuse me, the pessimistic thinkers would say, hey, my dad died of a heart attack. My uncle died of a heart attack. What's the point? I give up, right? So it changes our behavior. And I'm not discounting the molecular stuff going on. I'm just not qualified to talk about it, but I am qualified to talk about behavior change. With that said, we have to be kind of careful because we don't want to be overly optimistic. And in fact, there's a number of books out there that I think go too far. And I'm not going to name any of them. And there's people who just talk about being positive and upbeat and optimistic all the time. That's not a good strategy. You are not ready. If we were overly optimistic as a country about COVID-19, so we didn't produce enough masks, ventilators, we don't have enough tests out there. And quite frankly, I think that part of that is being overly optimistic.
Mhm.
Chris, you look like you're ready to just jump on something.
No, I agree. I mean, I tend to agree. And I just, as you say it, and people watching and everything, I mean, after 300 plus interviews, these things just come up. I've had at least 3 guests talk about exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Just
Yep.
this idea that we mistake, positive thinking for positive affirmations. And although they're not necessarily bad, they're not realistic. In fact, we're going to have a guest on, and I'll look for his book, but he coaches Russell Wilson, and he talks about the quarterback,
Yep.
and he talks about neutral thinking is actually the most beneficial.
Mm.
So neutral, not necessarily meaning not optimistic, but looking at things realistically and taking an optimistic approach, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So-
Anyways.
So that's a good segue as well, because I'm going to argue, not necessarily with this guy, but I think, in fact, I think he saved himself with what you said at the end. And what I would argue is that we just need to be somewhere to the right of center, right? We need to be realistically optimistic, because when we're way down here and even maybe around here, we're going to give up because we find the situation to be hopeless. When we're way over here, we're not actually, we're less likely to consider the risks. And I would tell you, being on this earth a little longer than you and John, and being a coach a little longer, I've coached people that were overly optimistic. And they were sometimes the people that got laid off with mergers. They just didn't see it coming. They thought they were so good at what they did. And that was one of the things that attracted people to them. But they had to move the slider down to the left a little bit, right? Now, I had to throw in some more cheesy clip art because Chris wanted some. But
I just have to say, Doug, I know you're not seeing the chats, but this is why I love the community we built and are trying to build. I mean, the comments are smarter than some of the things I'll ever hear. So I just wanted to say that.
Hey, we appreciate that. Thank you. And again, don't hesitate to interrupt and just let me know what's going on.
Oh, I won't.
All right. So the example I like to give of realistic optimism is NASA in the 60s. John F. Kennedy said, hey, we're going to send a guy to the moon, bring him safely home by the end of this decade. And what a lot of people don't know is that, everyone at NASA held their breath on that one, because they're like, we don't have any idea how we're going to get there. Let alone, we're having trouble orbiting the Earth and getting rockets to take off more than 10 feet off the ground without exploding. Over time, though, what they did was they latched on to that statement, and they said, they started to believe it could happen. So they moved to the right. And however, they kept in mind all the safety issues, because it wasn't just get to the moon, it was return the man safely to home. And they had to take that on. And what I would also argue is, without some level of fairly high optimism, we're not going to cure this disease, come up with antivirals. And just let's talk about hope and optimism just for 1 second in this particular context. I just finished, I told John and Chris this, an hour-long resilience session with a company in our area that's actually working on a COVID-19 vaccine, and they're going to human trials, I think sometime in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And they get up every morning with meaning and purpose, and they are excited and they are confident. And that was so nice to hear, right? Developing vaccines for really complex viruses like this is no easy task. If they didn't have an optimistic leader and optimistic leaders in that organization, I wouldn't even mention them. But they really are gung-ho, ready to go. And, you know, we're all crossing our fingers, praying for them and so forth. But we need optimism in times like this, but we need it to be realistically optimistic so we don't, you know, become unsafe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Chris and John, one of the things that I love talking about in the realm of optimism is luck, right? So Richard Wiseman is a psychologist out of the UK. He's written a number of books, but he's also done some interesting studies. And, you know, let's actually go to the chat box with this. And I'm going to ask a question of all our listeners. Is he gathered several hundred people for a study who had already purchased tickets to the National Lottery in the UK years ago. He gave them his test on luck, right? So for instance, it's just like that optimism scale you saw. You either considered yourself to be unlucky or lucky. And of course it was a sliding scale, but you fell on one side or the other. My question to your listeners is, who do you think won more in the lottery? The lucky people or the unlucky people? So let's give a couple seconds or minutes for people to put their answers in the chat room, and I'm going to watch these as well. So who won more money, the lucky people or the unlucky?
You know, if you listen to our podcast for any period of time, you should know the answer to this, because I specifically remember Richard telling either this exact one or anyways, he was he's brilliant.
Yeah, he's good. The lucky will claim they win more.
I like that. Like that.
Dan. So Chris, what's the answer, man?
It's your lucky folks.
Chris, not with the lottery.
Oh, I was thinking of the one with the magazine.
Yeah,
the magazine one.
So basically what he proved was that luck was not necessarily a real tangible factor that impacts our lives. They won equal amounts. Now, I'm not going to use the newspaper study. I'm going to use a different study he did. He had a study where he had people who took the assessment that he gave them show up at a coffee shop. And they were supposed to meet somebody, and I think it was for a job interview or something. And what he did was he had a $5 bill placed on the doorstep to the coffee shop. Guess who saw the $5 bill more often than the other group?
That one's the lucky people.
That's the lucky people. There you go, Chris. All right. Chris, you got 1 out of 2. That's good. The idea is that lucky people actually pay attention to their surroundings, right? They're looking around. They're looking for luck. They just see it. It happens to all of us in equal amounts. But the people who consider themselves lucky actually pay attention. The other interesting part of the study was that when they went into the coffee shop, there was a Confederate in there who was, I think, an actor playing like a wealthy businessman. And the people would walk in, and it was a very uncrowded coffee shop. And they would look, you know, of course, they're looking for who they're supposed to be doing this interview with. And this Confederate, the actor, would say, "Hey, are you looking for somebody?" The unlucky people would ignore that person or say, no, I'm fine, I'm good. The lucky people would say, you know, I'm here for a job interview. I'm supposed to see this guy, John. I don't know where he is. And they would engage in a conversation and make a new friend. And that Confederate would then say, hey, you know, I have my own business. The point is this. When we engage socially, that's one of the things that he found was different in the habits and the behaviors of people who consider themselves lucky. They actually talk to more people. They're more likely to just reach out. And as an introvert, that's me, by the way. John, you an introvert as well?
Yes, he is.
An extroverted introvert.
Yeah. And we just recorded on tape. I'm showing my age. Chris, the extrovert, answering for John, the introvert. That was perfect.
This is why we've built this thing for decades. I mean,
couldn't find the mute button fast enough.
So anyway, and by the way, I'm in the middle of a luck challenge. One of the things I took from his book, I'm trying to think if I put a picture of his book up there.
You did, I think.
Yeah, it's somewhere in there, right? There we go.
Mm.
I'm actually doing a luck journal every night at I think 8 or 9 o'clock. I'm just writing in OneNote for myself. What are all the lucky things that happened to me today? Just little things, not necessarily things that I had cause of, but just, hey, the weather was nice. I was able to get my 10,000 steps in because it didn't rain till 7 o'clock at night. The point that he has you do this is to start noticing the luck that's in your life because it's out there. Okay. And it's actually kind of a fun, easy thing to do that takes me probably 2 minutes every night. And I'm doing it for 1 month. All right. So let's talk a little bit about curiosity. I like to talk about it in the vein of mindfulness. Okay. But before we get there, a little bit of research. We know from Todd Kashdan's work, and you had Todd on the show too, I believe.
Yes, we did.
I think he was talking about negative emotion. He was talking more about, he wasn't talking about curiosity though.
Gosh, I don't know.
All right.
I'd have to go
He's
back.
written 2 phenomenal books. One is Curious, and the other one is The Upside of Your Dark Side. And we'll, in fact,
that one,
I think that was the one. I'm going to mention that one a little bit later. But in short, the people who tend to be more curious are less likely, believe it or not, to get Alzheimer's and dementia. They consider themselves to have the ability, right? They have the growth mindset, so they're going to learn and increase their intelligence. They find more meaning and purpose in life because they do things like start a podcast to talk to smart people, right? It's a hobby that's turning into a business and reaching tens of thousands of people. And they're also more likely to be curious when they talk to other people, right? They're asking questions. They're focusing on other people and empathizing a little bit more. So what does this mean? When we're curious, when we're mindful, we're a lot more like the dog than we are just worried about all the crap that's going on in our lives. And this to me, when we talk about mindfulness, I like to use the definition, something to the effect of in non-judgmental in the present moment, right? Something like that. And this picture is worth a million words in my mind because it really does, we want to be a little bit more like the dog and a lot less burdened by all the stuff that's going on tomorrow and all the stuff that might have happened yesterday. And let's just be in the present moment. But the question is, how do we do that, right? Now, the obvious answer that probably a lot of people on this call are going to say is meditation. So I'm actually just curious. Who can we do the hand raise feature? I didn't do a poll for this one, but maybe raise your hand if you're.
That might be, that might be going beyond the pale.
Right,
you can use reactions, or you could
yes.
just type it in the chat there.
Yep. So the reactions, by the way, is if you click on participants.
Lisa got it. I see.
Yay. If you click on participants at the bottom of your screen, I think on the
Oh,
right-hand side.
Alan did it. Yeah.
All right. You'll see on the right-hand side, you can do a whole bunch of stuff.
Dave Burse.
So
Joe.
the question is, do you meditate? So we got a yes or a no. We got clapping by Ingrid. Thank you.
Wow. There's a lot of meditators on here.
I think Darren's meditating right now. It looks very peaceful. All right, Darren. Who else we got here? I'm not, Lori's clapping. She must. That's awesome. We got 6 people saying yes, I think. Dave.
I want to just throw a shout out here. Ingrid offers it Wednesday and Sunday on Zoom. So if anyone's interested, Ingrid's in the chat. You all could connect.
Yeah, love it.
That's what this is for.
This is fantastic. So, I'll just, a couple of quick tips as somebody who had a lot of trouble with meditation and somebody who now does it every single morning and just for a couple minutes even before I go to bed, is I wake up every morning and I do actually a body scan. I do some deep breathing and then I just pay attention to my body from head to toe. And that sets me in a great place because I think some people, there's multiple types of meditation. And I like the focused kind. I think it's a little easier to get your brain wrapped around this as opposed to the unfocused where you're supposed to completely clear your mind. I'm not versed in that. I will tell you the body scan works for me where I pay attention to my entire body as if there's a magical scan going through my body. And then I practice a loving kindness meditation where I simply pay attention to the people that I care about the most in this world. So for instance, my 2 kids, I will in my mind say that I love them. And I can even just imagine a hug for a second, go through my parents, my other loved ones, friends, maybe even John and Chris every once in a while, right? I love you guys.
Love you
And
too, Doug.
thank you. And what's really interesting about this is that there are multiple studies that when you engage in something like loving kindness meditation, and it's not the only kind, of course, that you can actually improve the your ability to react in the moment, and like Chris said, kind of widen the gap between stimulus and response with strengthening your vagus nerve, which runs somewhere from, I think, your brain through your gut. It's kind of like that. When you get that gut feeling, we can get more effective at that. Now, a little less, I guess, not touchy-feely, I don't know what the word is, but a little bit maybe more practical or easy to do is what I like to call the loving kindness, or excuse me, the mindfulness bracelet. And the way this works is you grab one of those rubber-based bracelets that have a cause on them, or just anyone will do, even I use a rubber band, is when you've got a thought or a situation that constantly pops up and you feel it saps your resilience, like you start thinking about it and all of a sudden your mood turns bad. Like when John has to think about Chris too often, right? He gets all bummed out, sad, anxious. Simply take
His day, Doug.
I know. This is all I did this for John to boost John's, the whole get John feeling better about himself. But basically start on one with the bracelet on one hand. And when that thought comes up, right? Maybe it's how much you can't stand your boss. Move, and then you start sliding into like how you want to quit and how mean he is or she is. Move it from one wrist to the other and then distract yourself. Move to something more productive. And it may sound overly simplified, but I used this during my divorce when I was getting very angry about, some of the arrangements that were taking place in the divorce. And I would find myself 5-10 minutes later, just sitting there thinking about it and furious. And I started to just move the wristband from one to the other and say, okay, now I'm going to think about what I have to do today. I have to get prepared for my next meeting. I'm going to go work out. I'm going to go for a run. But I distracted myself. It only takes a couple of days for you to become much more effective at moving yourself from these unproductive thoughts to productive thoughts by using the wristband. Okay? Highly recommend it. Simple thing to do. Questions, Chris?
I like that exercise. I'm going to try that one out.
Go for it. Let's talk a little bit about positive emotions and uplifting, right? In fact, Barbara Fredrickson wrote a book called Positivity a number of years ago, 13 years ago. Really neat. And what she does is she actually looks at all of these emotions and gives you tips on what these emotions can do for you, and from a positive perspective, how you can get more of them. And, one that I'll focus on just for a second, I'm looking for my gratitude, is one of my favorites. One of the simplest things you can do before you go to bed every night is write down 3 good things that happened to you that day. Similar to the luck journal, but I'm going to add a twist to it. Okay. So imagine for a second that my son comes home, and this is a real entry in my gratitude journal. And he says, hey, Dad, let's throw the football, right? So I go, okay. So we go throw the football, and then we eat dinner. He gets his homework done. We all go to bed. And before I go to bed, I write down, what are my 3 good things? Oh, you know what? Zach said, I got to play catch with Zach, right? So I write down that. Now, the other thing that we wanted you to do is write down why that good thing happened. This is really important to get the most out of this exercise. So I might write down, well, why did this happen? Zach asked me, right? Pretty simple. Now compare that explanation with this one. I write down again, Zach and I played catch. Why did this happen? Well, Zach asked me. Zach loves me. I love Zach. Zach enjoys spending time with me. I'm healthy. Zach is healthy. We can afford a football. We live in a safe neighborhood. The weather was nice, right? See where I'm going with this? And the idea is to really invest in the reasons why, because it just expands the gratitude. And what the research shows is that people who did this exercise over just the course of 1 week lowered their depressive symptoms by like 90%, increased their happiness by 90. Now, let me pause, and because I know we may have some mental health professionals on the line, you should not substitute this for seeing a mental health professional. However, there are some really interesting results with people who practice gratitude because it reorients us towards what's already good in our lives. And I would argue that no matter how bad your day was, you could find 3 good things to happen. That happened. Chris, are we getting any questions or comments about that?
We are not, but one thing I do want to note is, and we touched on this at the beginning of the call, but I realize it's 5 and many of you, kind of blocked out this hour. So, and of course, everybody can do what they please. We're going to keep going because 1, this is going to be recorded, and 2, I know some want to stay on. Don't feel any obligation. We understand your time is valuable. And to those that do have to jump off, we just want to say thank you for taking that valuable time.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thank you to everyone who. And we do know you need to drop off, but I also thought it would be fun to throw in a quick poll here to see. Let's go back to my polls, and we're going to ask you a question about positive emotions, and that question is, tell me when you're seeing it, Chris. Oh, there we go. Is it up there?
Not on mine. I don't have it.
Thomas, are you seeing it? Give me a thumbs up if you see it. Nope. Okay, it's not showing. This happened to me another time with Zoom.
Huh. Yeah, sometimes polls are pretty weak on Zoom. I will say that.
So it's a technical glitch because nobody is responding to it.
Yeah.
Basically, I was going to ask. So just in the chat box, in the chat box, which positive emotion do you experience the most on average?
Ooh, I like that question.
Thank you. And it probably would be helpful if you had the list of positive emotions, right?
Oh, this is cool. Oh, this is really fun.
Yeah.
Are you seeing these, Doug?
Yeah. I just opened it up.
The chat open.
Yeah. By the way, I read a study that said when we experience awe, it actually slows down our sense of time.
Wow.
And I will tell you, I am lucky enough I have out of my window, I get to see the sun. Where's the sunrise? Sun's setting. No, sun rises out of my bedroom window. And I got to tell you, I take pictures of that all the time. It just blows me away. And I love that sense of awe, right? That the world is a lot bigger than just this little circle that I live in. It's also, I think, a healthy way to think. Your problems seem smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah. All the above. I love it. Thank you, Lori. Serenity Now. If you're a Seinfeld fan,
I was thinking of Serenity Now.
Since I started spending more time writing things down, I'm more grateful for it. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I got to tell you that gratitude exercise, there's a lot of psychologists that don't even like talking about it anymore because it's old news.
Yeah.
But gosh, it is still so powerful, So I like it. So speaking of like being with family and dinners, I'm going to move along a little bit here. and I am going to talk a little bit about family. So a couple years ago, I had only one of my sons for some reason. I don't know why. We were doing a one-on-one. And he was 8 or 9 at the time. It was the springtime, and he had to go to bed. It was school night. So he goes, "Hey, Dad, will you lay down with me?" And I said, "Sure." And he immediately laid down with his head on my chest, and his arm was around my rib cage, right? And he looked up at me. And by the way, we did our 3 good things. We do that every night. And then he looked up at me and he goes, "I love you, Dad." And I was like, "Wow, that's cool. I love you too." And then I felt like that head get heavier and the arm get heavier, and his breathing was heavier, and I could tell he was falling asleep. So, I just kind of pushed him out of the way, and I went down. I watched the Red Sox beat the Yankees. And yeah, we got
that one game.
Yeah. So I went down. I watched a baseball game, and then the next day, I went to a positive psychology conference at George Mason University, and a guy named Rick Hansen was talking about this idea of rewiring our brains by bringing more positivity in it. And I can see, Danielle, were you there? But you love Rick. Okay. So he's got a great book called Hardwiring Happiness, by the way. And one of the exercises he did this with 300 people, Chris. And I got to tell you, I was in tears doing this, because you know what he did was he had us relive the moment. So it's really pretty simple, right? Think of a positive moment in your life. It could be a child on your chest. It could be when someone proposed to you, or you proposed, or your daughter graduated from college. I don't care what it is, but something where you experienced joy, happiness, love, awe, curiosity, okay? Close your eyes. Imagine that there's a shower of these positive emotions just dripping over your head, and your brain is like a sponge and you're absorbing the positive emotions. Hold on to that emotion, hold on to that moment for 10 seconds. See if it can last for 20, maybe 30. Here's my point. That moment with my son, I can get into a time machine and I can go there for the rest of my life whenever I want. And I often do. And what Rick argues is that if we just do this exercise of savoring, because that's really what it is, if we just do this savoring exercise a couple times a day, we start to rewire ourselves to also be more oriented towards positivity. Okay, so it's one of my favorites. Of course, I can't leave this section without saying, let's not try to be positive, upbeat, optimistic, happy all the time. One, it's not possible. Two, it's not functional. It is important that I sometimes get angry with other people because they violated my rights. It's also important that my kids get embarrassed when they say something inappropriate in the classroom, right? These emotions all evolved to help us survive longer, right? So for instance, with embarrassment, we were shunned from the group years ago. And then we were literally sent on a death sentence in a sense by being kicked out of our tribe. So these are important emotions to feel. And the way I like to look at emotions now is they're simply markers, right? If I'm feeling happy, then I'm safe. If I'm angry, upset, well, you know what? Something's wrong, and I'm going to have to address this and think a little bit differently about it and fix things one way or the other. By the way, it's a great book. Todd is still on my bad list for putting me in there without telling me about it. There's a quick story about me coaching Little League football, page 83 or something like that.
That's pretty funny. I didn't know
it
that.
is, Chris, it's funny, and I was reading it, and I was in a Starbucks one day, and I got to that page, and I just started laughing out loud. Anyway, it's a fantastic book. Highly recommend it. So let's finish up and talk about connection and support, right? So we know from the research that being socially engaged lowers our risk for heart disease. We catch fewer colds. And I know that third one's a little weird right now because we're dealing with the coronavirus. Obviously this research was done well before then, but we're basically, the more we get socially engaged, more good stuff happens to us, and we're physically healthier, okay? And what we should, and I got a really good question from the last group that I did this with. Hey, how do we do this when now, if you're living in Virginia, you're supposed to shelter in place for how long? 2 months, 2.5 months, something like that. I mean, it's crazy. Do this, download a free copy of Zoom. Get your family on. Last Friday, I was telling Chris and John about this, was my mom's birthday. And we did a surprise birthday party for her where it was just me and my kids on at first. We were just saying happy birthday to her. I, of course, had to help her get on Zoom and, use the controls properly. And then all of a sudden, my sisters, her grandkids, her son-in-laws all jumped on, and we all just yelled surprise at once, and she was in tears. It was fantastic, right? And we all stayed on for like a half hour. In fact, I engineered it where I designed it pretty much like this, where we had a PowerPoint with pictures of her. We did some polls it was wonderful. It was just so much fun, right? And everyone participated. We were all laughing. And it was the best we could do now, and we realized that it was actually pretty good, right? So what can we do about this? Well, let's actually put this in the context of how important it is for us now to come up with new and innovative ideas, right? We're going to have to reinvent capitalism. I believe this. I'm not anti-capitalistic, but we are seeing the fact that it breaks down with something like this. We are also recognizing that we are not ready for a pandemic. We have got to come up with new ideas. And I'm actually really confident that the scientists out there are going to come up with great antivirals, that my client's going to hopefully hit a home run with, there's 3 companies going home. I hope all the companies hit it big with a vaccine for COVID-19. We're going to have to find out a new way to work, right? Restaurants are going to have to reinvent themselves. All these tables sitting next to each other. I mean, things are going to change. And what I want to throw out there is, in fact, why don't we just get some answers in the chat box, Chris?
Mm-hmm.
My question to you is, how do you feel when someone says, you come to somebody with a really good idea? Hey, Chris, let's do this on the webcast or on our podcast. And Chris says, yeah, but, right? What happens? How do you feel when someone says yes, but to you? Go ahead and type in your answer. And by the way, Donna, we're not ignoring that question about money over people. Maybe I'll address that while people are putting things. I don't know how we do it, but I think more people that are focusing on the good things and doing the right thing, that will hopefully also be contagious.
I just want to say, while people are answering, and man, these are great answers, but
Yep.
to Donna's point, that's, I just get, this one tugs at me because that's why we do this podcast. I've got beliefs and I don't think they should be everyone's belief, but I do think that the more we can educate people on a variety of things, the more we can expand people's worldview, the better decisions everyone will make. And I don't know what those decisions are, but that's why we do this. I mean, that's why we're having Doug on. That's why we have these conversations. It's just, I'm a firm believer in we can't tell people what to do or think, but we can help them, expand their minds so that they can make perhaps better decisions.
The research on creativity and innovation is very clear. We need more ideas, not less. It's not about good ideas. It's about actually the number of ideas is highly correlated to how innovative and creative we can be. And if, I'm looking at all these answers, I feel dismissive. I stop giving answers. I stop giving ideas. I totally agree. And it really does shut down communication. In fact, my mentor likes to say it's the but eraser, because when you say yes, but, you are erasing just about everything else that person said. And here's what I think is happening almost mechanically, is that when Doug says yes, but to Chris, let's make me the bad guy for once. What I've done is I might hear the first words out of his mouth and I'm already formulating my yes, but. Guess what I've done? I stopped listening. Stop paying attention, right? When we use this phrase, and I know somebody already put this in there, we need yes, yes. I'll even throw in the yes, and we are forced to listen. And we are forced to demonstrate that listening by saying, so let's just say Chris comes to me with a new idea on my own podcast. I could say yes, but I don't really like that type of person on. I could say, yes, and how do I get into a better mindset so I can interview that person and be more effective, right? It gives Chris, first of all, it gives him permission to continue talking, and it opens me up to being more creative and innovative. And I wish I could take credit for this, but as many of you already know, this comes from improv, right? This is an improv tool from years and decades ago. That's just And here's the tip, by the way. Replace yes, but with yes, and for 1 week. Just 1 week. Eliminate yes. I'm not saying you can never say yes, but in your entire life. I'm not an extreme absolute person. What I am saying is that get in the habit of pausing and saying yes, and, because it'll make you listen. You'll become more highly connected to other people. And then Chris and John did give me permission to do this, to say, I'm actually so enthralled with this idea of how can we expand our brains and how can we become better thinkers, that I made my whole podcast about it. I'm writing a business parable, a book on it right now. So it's called Looking for And. It's not nearly as good. It's not nearly as entertaining.
Yes, it is.
But great. I don't interrupt the people. No, it's a lot of fun. And it'd be really nice just to come over and give us a look every once in a while.
a couple of things real quick, Doug, before you wrap it up, that I just wanted to say to everyone. One is, you might have found yourself a lot through this. Maybe it was, as we talk about yes ands, going, yeah, I know that, because a lot of things these days, especially if you listen to our podcast, it's the type of person you are. You're curious, you're out there. The thing that I always challenge myself is common sense is not always common practice. So even right there, I'm well aware of the yes and versus the yes but I never thought about it from the perspective you just mentioned, which is what is the impact it has on the response. Of course, from a logical perspective, I knew it, but I just really like that framing. So for everyone out there kind of thinking, just because we know something doesn't necessarily mean we do it. And then I know that you don't really like to plug things. I mean, and I just wanted to reiterate that Doug's podcast is great. It's a similar structure as ours. Obviously some different guests. Obviously Doug has a different style, but I would definitely recommend it.
Yeah, very kind of you. And, I was going someplace else with yes and I lost my train of thought. I don't know where I was going with yes and listening. What else did you say? It was almost. I might have had a profound thought that I lost. All right. Well, I might think about it on the way out. But look, hopefully you can remember focus, understand your context, and you can bring this to just be more effective over time, to practice things, and little by little you'll find yourself being more effective when adversity hits. And I had to throw this quote in. This was sent to me by a fellow executive coach, who, let difficulty transform you, and it will. Stop fighting it. That's the mindfulness part of this. And it will. In my experience, we just need help in learning how not to run away. Boy, that is just, to me, that moved me. I just thought this was one of the most beautiful things I've read in the last year, I think. And we need it more than ever right now. We need to stay engaged with everything we're doing, whether we're out of work and we need to find income, and that's putting pressure on our relationships, or whether we're sick or we know somebody's sick. We've got to kind of, I hate to use the phrase, but lean into it. And instead of running away, we've got to accept our circumstances. This is a big thing that Eckhart Tolle talks about in The Power Now, right? Acceptance actually gives you power, right? It gives you the power to start to change things. And, if you've got a question or comment, don't hesitate to just email me directly. This is my company. We do like coaching and workshops and so forth. And I'm just super grateful and humbled that you guys gave me, oh my gosh, a little over an hour to chat. And I wish everybody safety and health. And I will leave on this. I believe in the human race. I believe in people like Chris and John who are trying to spread our ability to become educated. And I believe very strongly that tough times are ahead and that we're going to come out of this and better and stronger than we were before. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, John.
Doug, thank you. Really appreciate it. And for all those that are on, if you didn't know this, Doug is to this day one of our most downloaded episodes. That is true. You see John nodding. He is our download guru. And a lot of that is his book, by the way, is, you saw a quick summation of it today, but it's really, the thing I like the most about his book is it's actionable. So I'd recommend it, Positively Resilient. And look, I don't know, Doug, if you've got a hard stop, but if anybody wanted to ask you a question, or would you be open to it?
Absolutely.
So if anybody wants to, there's a couple of ways you could do it. Chat, raise your hand, or if you might be so bold, just come off mute.
Yeah.
We could probably stay on for another 13 minutes or so.
Yeah, I'm gonna allow participants to unmute themselves now.
Awesome. And I can't see. I'm gonna go to full screen, so hopefully I can see everybody.
Yeah, and I mean, if you don't have questions, it's fine. I
Yeah.
just thought we would open it up.
I think Darren's still meditating.
I want Darren's mindset.
Stay, Darren. I love it.
All right.
I think you're good to go. Oh.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you all. Have a great night, afternoon, morning, wherever you are in the world.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you. Peace.